There were 5 people executed in the month of September. Freddy Owens, South Carolina, September 20th. Owens was convicted of murdering a store clerk during a robbery in 1997, and his execution was very controversial because of a last-minute information that could have exonerated him. Well, for that murder at least. Let's go through the details of what happened. Freddy Eugene Owens was born on March 18, 1978 in South Carolina. His mother, who was 18 at the time of his birth, placed him in foster care when he was 5 years old, and it is said that his family mistreated and neglected him. After his birth father, who had abused his wife and children, left their lives, he eventually returned to his biological mother, who had married another man in the meantime. But when Owens was 7 years old, he saw his grandma shoot someone, and his stepfather had abused his mother as well as him. Because of his background, Owens was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder at a young age. Owens and his friends Lester Young, Nakio Vance, Stephen Andra Golden walked outside together on November 1, 1997, with the goal of committing armed robbery. Golden and Owens stormed inside a convenience shop holding the female cashier at gunpoint, while Young and Vance were somewhere else. During Owens's murder trial, Golden claimed that Irene Granger Graves, the 41-year-old clerk, was shot in the head by Owens after she failed to open the safe. After taking $37 from the cash register, Golden and Owens left the scene. They subsequently met up with Vance and Young, who were informed that Owens had shot a woman during the attempted robbery. Following their arrest on November 11, 1997, Owens and Golden, then 18 years old, were both charged with murder. Golden and the prosecution worked out a plea deal whereby the prosecution agreed to drop the murder case and the death penalty. Golden received a 28-year prison sentence after being convicted of voluntary manslaughter. Vance and Young were also charged in relation to the offense. Owens was put on trial by a jury on February 8, 1999, on accusations of murder, armed robbery, unlawful use of a firearm, and conspiracy to commit armed robbery. Even when Golden's evidence proved that Owens killed Graves personally during the heist, Owens insisted he didn't kill anyone and denied any involvement. Subsequent reports stated that the CCTV showed 2 men, Golden and Owens, entering the store while wearing different masks. One of them, Owens, wore a ski mask and shot and killed Graves. Owens was identified as the man in the ski mask, while Golden was the man in the stalking mask. The jury returned a guilty verdict on February 15, 1999, and Owens' sentencing trial was set for 2 days later. On February 16, 1999, less than 12 hours after his conviction for Irene Graves' murder, Freddy Owens killed a fellow inmate. Christopher Brian Lee, 28, was the victim. He was incarcerated for 90 days after committing a driving infraction. The day following Lee's murder, on February 17, 1999, Owens appeared in court for his sentencing hearing. There, he gave a thorough confession and described how he killed Lee in the cell he shared with Lee and 10 other prisoners. Lee is said to have made fun of Owens' conviction and even boasted to him that his cousin was a part of the jury that convicted him. This infuriated Owens, who attacked Lee. He hit him in the face, stabbed his throat and eye with a ballpoint pen, and brutally strangled him with a sheet. To put an end to the attack, Owens hit Lee in the head, burned his eyes and hair with a cigarette lighter, then choked him by forcing his left nostril shut and jamming a pen inside his right. As a result, Lee passed away, and Owens, who insisted on his innocence, said he did so because he had been wrongfully convicted. Lee's grieving family demanded an official investigation into Lee's passing. The prosecution argued that whatever sympathetic circumstances of Owens' background were, there was no excuse for his abhorrent actions and murderous behavior, and that he should take full responsibility for what he did. The prosecution brought attention to the tragic consequences of Graves' death, including the fact that her 3 children had to be sent away under the care of their grandmother. The defense had pleaded with the jury to show mercy because of Owens' chaotic childhood and mental illness. Owens received the capital punishment as a result. Following his sentencing for the death of Graves, Owens and Fred Walker Jr., a 19-year-old who was suspected of being Owens' accomplice in the prison murder, were both charged with Lee's murder. Around the time Owens used up all of his appeals against the death penalty in 2019, the second murder accusation against him was dropped. Due to procedural flaws in his first sentencing trial, on September 4, 2001, Owens challenged his conviction and sentence to the South Carolina Supreme Court. He was given the opportunity to have a new sentencing trial. On February 17, 2003, Owens received a second death sentence. A year after the death penalty was reinstated in his case, on November 20, 2004, Owens was given permission for another resentencing hearing. Owens received the death sentence for the third time. He attempted to have this third death sentence overturned as well, but on July 14, 2008, the South Carolina Supreme Court denied his appeal and upheld the conviction. In 2015, Owens converted to Islam and he went by the Muslim name Khalil Divine Black Son Allah. Owens was originally scheduled to be executed on October 3, 2008, but the U.S. Supreme Court granted a stay of execution while an appeal was ongoing, so the execution was postponed. Owens' execution was later rescheduled for January 9, 2009, but it was postponed again due to legal issues. 12 years later, a third death warrant was approved, rescheduling Owens' execution for June 25, 2021. However, this too was ultimately stopped by Owens' last-minute appeal, and the South Carolina Supreme Court decided that both Owens and Brad Sigmund's executions ought to be delayed until they were offered the option of dying by firing squad or electrocution. At the time of Owens' third death warrant, South Carolina had been operating under an unofficial moratorium on executions since 2011. This was because the state was experiencing a shortage of the drugs needed for lethal injection executions, as well as drug companies refusing to sell their products to the state so that executions could take place. Henry McMaster, the state governor of South Carolina, issued new laws in 2021 reviving the electric chair and introducing the firing squad as a backup technique in case lethal injection was not available. The legislation also gave prisoners the options to select the manner of execution of their choice. It was reported in September 2023 that the state had succeeded in acquiring medications to resume the use of lethal injections for executions. Less than a month after the Supreme Court's decision, on August 23, 2024, Owens' death warrant was issued, and on September 20, 2024, his execution was scheduled to take place. Owens was the first person in South Carolina to be killed in 13 years. He was given until September 6, 2024 to indicate his preference among the 3 execution procedures for carrying out his death sentence. As a Muslim, Owens refused to take part in making a decision that would result in his demise. Therefore, he sought to provide one of his attorneys the authority to make decisions on his behalf. Owens' attorney attested to the fact that she chose a fatal injection for her client. On September 18, 2024, 2 days before Owens was set to be executed, his attorneys filed an emergency motion based on a statement from his accomplice, Stephen Golden. In it, Golden claimed that Owens was not the real killer and that he had been wrongfully accused of being the shooter. He did not dare name the real killer for fear of being killed himself by the man and his associates, but he didn't want an innocent man to be executed. The South Carolina Supreme Court dismissed the claims of innocence because Owens had admitted to shooting and killing Irene Graves on multiple occasions, and he had testified about the crime in both his 1999 murder trial and his 2003 resentencing trial. Owens begged McMaster for clemency on September 18, 2024, pleading with the governor to commute his death sentence, but his clemency request was denied. At Broad River Correctional Institution, 46-year-old Owens was executed by lethal injection on September 20, 2024. He refused to say anything more than "bye" to his lawyer as his final words. Owens received a single pentobarbital dose at roughly 6:45 p.m. and was declared deceased at 6:55 p.m. For his final meal, he placed an order for 2 cheeseburgers, French fries, a well-done ribeye steak, 6 chicken wings, 2 strawberry sodas, and a slice of apple pie. In the month of September, 4 other people were executed, and there is a strong possibility that the next person we are going to talk about was in fact innocent and wrongfully convicted. Marcellus Williams, Missouri, September 24. Williams was accused of killing Felicia Ann Gale on August 11, 1998, during a break-in at her gated community in University City, Missouri. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch reporter Gale, 42, was discovered dead in her house after being stabbed 43 times with a butcher's knife that was taken from her kitchen. Williams was born on December 30, 1968, in South Bend, Indiana. When he was approximately 5 years old, his mother and 2 brothers relocated to St. Louis, Missouri. Williams was raised in a poor, dysfunctional environment where he was introduced to drugs, alcohol, and firearms at an early age. He also experienced essay at the hands of family members. He was abandoned by his parents and was given encouragement for his drug and alcohol addiction. Williams was greatly affected by the loss of his older brother in 1997, so much so that he broke into a home and was imprisoned till being found guilty in 1998 of robbing a donut shop. Williams had previously married a single mother with a daughter and had a son. He committed himself to studying Islam while he was behind bars. On February 5, 1956, Felicia Ann Gale was born and raised in Rockford, Illinois. After earning a journalism degree from the University of Illinois, she began her career as a reporter for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, where she remained until 1992. She quit her job at the newspaper to focus on voluntary work and philanthropy, which included teaching and mentoring underprivileged kids. She married Dr. Daniel Pickus in 1979. Dr. Pickus oversaw the Interventional Radiology Division at Barnes Jewish Hospital in St. Louis. On August 11, 1998, Gale's husband came home in the evening and found her body. When police got there at about 8 o'clock at night, they discovered Gale covered in blood on her left side and in a fetal position. There were up to 43 stab wounds on her, and a big butcher's knife was discovered stuck in her neck. Authorities further said that she had defensive wounds to her hands and arms, including a sizable cut in her right elbow. She also had knife wounds to her back, thigh, and 2 more in her neck. Her husband's Macintosh computer, her jacket, and her purse were stolen. In the initial police report, investigators mentioned that the incident occurred during a neighborhood burglary spree. Gale's family offered a $10,000 reward in May 1999 for information that resulted in an arrest and conviction in the case. 2 people, Laura Asaro and Henry Cole, accused Marcellus Scott Williams of the crime. For his evidence, Cole was awarded $5,000, while Asaro made no request for compensation for coming forward. Williams's criminal history was considerable. Cole claimed that when both of them were being held on unrelated charges to the murder, Williams had confessed to him in a jailhouse. Williams was already serving the 20-year term he was given for robbing a donut business. Williams's girlfriend at the time of the incident, Laura Asaro, testified that Williams had confessed to her and described the events in detail. Asaro stated in her deposition that she discovered Gale's ID in a purse in Williams's vehicle. She further stated in her testimony that she observed blood on Williams's clothes, scratches on his neck, and a laptop in his vehicle. She is claimed to have revealed information not included in the public accounts of the crime. The physical evidence recovered from the crime site, including a shoe print, fingerprints, and hair found there, was deemed by prosecutors as inconclusive. These items did not match Williams. Although the murderer was wearing gloves, the knife found at the scene only matched the DNA of the prosecution team members who handled it after it was forensically examined and shown to be devoid of fingerprints. A St. Louis Post-Dispatch ruler and calculator that had belonged to Gale were found in Williams's vehicle after a search. Additionally, a man testified that Williams had sold the victim's laptop to him, and that laptop was a match to the one that was stolen from the crime scene. Williams was given the death penalty after being found guilty of first-degree murder in 2001. Following his trial, Williams was kept on death row at the Potosi Correctional Center. Up until August 2024, when he accepted an Alford plea of guilty, he insisted on his innocence in the Gale case. He made multiple unsuccessful appeals of his case. In 2015, His execution via lethal injection was initially planned. During the appeals process, the defense presented information showing that the DNA extracted from the knife at the scene did not fit Williams's profile and instead revealed an unknown guy. Later, that guy was identified as the male prosecutor who had handled the knife. Williams' execution was delayed until August 22, 2017. The state Supreme Court refused to hear the fresh DNA evidence or to halt the execution, thus questions remained. The prosecutor stated that despite the DNA evidence, they were confident in the case because it was not the foundation for the conviction. That day, Governor Eric Greitens ordered an impromptu stay of execution. In order to look into the fresh DNA evidence and other aspects of the case, the governor established a board of inquiry. When Mike Parson, the newly appointed governor, took office in June 2023, he dissolved the 5-judge panel without waiting for their report and lifted the stay of Williams's execution, arguing that the court had to reach a conclusion. Afterwards, State Attorney General Andrew Bailey requested that Williams's execution date be determined by the state Supreme Court. According to a lawsuit filed by the Midwest Innocence Project in August 2023, the St. Louis County prosecuting attorney has said on record that he has strong evidence supporting Williams's innocence. According to the Innocence Project, there is a history of the Missouri Attorney General's office rejecting DNA evidence that clears an accused individual. Wesley Bell, the prosecutor for St. Louis County, filed a motion on January 26, 2024, requesting the St. Louis County Circuit Court to set aside Marcellus Williams' death sentence. He pointed to obvious bias in the jury selection process, probable ineffective assistance of counsel, and possible flaws in the police investigation. He requested a hearing from the court to go over the new evidence as well as other details of the investigation and trial. A special prosecutor's assessment of the case and the conclusions of 3 separate independent DNA experts, all of whom agreed that Williams's male DNA was not on the murder weapon, comprised the new evidence. That DNA belonged to an associate prosecutor and investigator who had handled the murder weapon barehanded during forensic testing. August 21, 2024 had been scheduled for a hearing to establish his innocence. Nevertheless, the move to vacate was denied since Williams's conviction was not based in part on DNA evidence. His execution was set for September 24, 2024 once more. The St. Louis County Circuit Court in Missouri set a hearing for July 2nd to consider the evidence of Williams's innocence. Despite the ongoing fight to overturn his conviction, the Missouri Supreme Court decided on July 12, 2024, that his execution was to proceed. Williams agreed to a plea deal made by the prosecution on August 21, 2024, which changed his death sentence to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the hearing, Williams's prosecutors made a strong case for him, pointing out that the murder weapon's DNA did not belong to him and that they had taken this into account when they offered him an offered plea deal to avoid the death penalty. Andrew Bailey, the state attorney general, was against this choice and demanded that the execution proceed according to plan. That same day, the Missouri Supreme Court struck down the plea deal agreement, keeping September 24 as Williams's execution date. His claims of innocence were to be considered in a clemency hearing. A few hours before Williams's planned execution, Parson refused to grant him clemency, and the issue was taken up by the U.S. Supreme Court. They also denied the request to halt the execution. Williams, 55, was put to death by lethal injection on September 24, 2024 at 6 p.m. at the Eastern Reception Diagnostic and Correctional Center in Bonne Terre, Missouri, in spite of public pleas for mercy. Williams was given tater tots and chicken wings for his final meal. The office of Missouri Governor Mike Parson issued a statement defending Williams's execution, pointing to his past criminal history and his claimed prison activities, which included attacking other inmates and threatening correctional officers, among other things. As he passed away on September 24, Williams left behind the words, "All praise be to Allah in every situation." I've seen so many videos on other social media platforms from people that seem to be convinced this man was innocent. I have to say it's very rare to see prosecutors take the side of the accused and fight for his life So that's one strong point I can't ignore. But the other evidence, the confessions from two other people, including his own girlfriend, the objects that belonged to the victim found in his possession, I don't know, I feel like there was not enough evidence to really support his innocence. Let me know in the comments what are your thoughts on the situation. In the same day Williams was executed, there was another inmate who was put to death in Texas, and what he did to land on death row, well, he fully deserved the death penalty. Travis James Mullis, Texas, September 24. Following an argument with his girlfriend, Karen Koberger, on January 29, 2008, Travis James Mullis, then 21 years old, drove his car with his 3-month-old son Elijah in the back seat. Mullis essayed his own son after parking his car in Galveston. He smothered Elijah as he cried, then repeatedly stomped on his head, breaking his skull and causing his death. He then threw the body to the side of the road near Sewell Boulevard. Jesse and Esmeralda Zarro, a married couple who were looking for animals, later found Elijah's body. Mullis left Texas and was missing for 3 days after killing his son. An arrest warrant was filed for him. Mullis turned himself in to the Philadelphia police on February 1, 2008, and he admitted to the crime. After being extradited back to Texas, Mullis faced charges for his son's death. In February 2008, his girlfriend was detained in New York and accused of endangering the welfare of her kid by leaving Elijah in Mullis's care, even though she was aware of his mental health issues and that the man could possibly harm the child. A little bit of background on Mullis. He was born on September 20, 1986, and he lost his mother when he was just 10 months old. His father had left the family not long after Mullis was born. He lived in Maryland after being adopted by his uncle and aunt, Gary and Ann Mullis, who served as his foster parents. As a child, he was essayed by Gary Mullis for 3 years, up until the age of 6. Gary Mullis was found guilty of molestation and he was sentenced to prison. Mullis frequently had psychiatric therapy for a variety of psychological issues, including suicidal and homicidal behavior, after the age of 4. He said that every time he assaulted someone, he experienced symptoms including hearing voices and flashbacks of his past abuse. At the age of 13, he was discovered essaying his 80-year-old cousin, and he was committed to the Jefferson School in Maryland, a facility for mentally disturbed young people. Before being discharged at the age of 17, he attended the juvenile school for 4 years. Later, when he was 18, Mullis relocated to Texas and lived with his girlfriend, and they had their son Elijah James Mullis, born on October 29, 2007. Mullis had a history of abusing young children prior to his 2008 arrest for murder. He told the authorities that he was sorry for Elijah's death and admitted to killing the boy because of his son's unceasing crying fits. After an hour of deliberation on March 11, 2011, the jury returned a guilty verdict, finding Mullis guilty of killing his son. A number of the children Mullis had assaulted in the past were called as witnesses in his sentencing hearing. The prosecution sought the death penalty because of the aggravating circumstances of the crime, while the defense argued for life in prison without the possibility of parole and pleaded for Mullis to be granted mercy for his difficult upbringing. On March 21, 2011, Mullis received a death sentence. Mullis's death warrant was issued on May 23, 2024, and it called for his execution to happen on September 24, 4 days after he turned 38. Mullis did not seek mercy with the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles or make an appeal to stay his execution in the last months before his scheduled date. Mullis was put to death at Huntsville Unit via lethal injection on September 24. In his final remarks, he expressed gratitude to prison staff and officials for changes made across the system that made rehabilitation possible. He also apologized to the mother of his son and her family, saying he regretted taking Elijah's life, but that he had no regrets about accepting death and giving up his fight against the death penalty. He received a single dosage of pentobarbital before being declared dead at 7:01 p.m. Mullis was the 4th prisoner executed in Texas in 2024. Just 2 days after his execution, Alabama had scheduled the very controversial second-ever nitrogen hypoxia execution. Alan Eugene Miller, Alabama, September 26. He shot 2 co-workers dead in their office, then murdered a third person at a business he had previously worked for. He was apprehended shortly after the shootings when authorities forced him to stop after seeing him on the nearby Interstate 65. He got into a quick fight with the police. In the shooting murders of co-workers Lee Holbrooks, 32, and Scott Yancey, 28, at Ferguson Enterprise, as well as Terry Jarvis, 39, at Post Air Gas, Miller pled not guilty due to mental illness or defect. Miller drove a truck for Ferguson and, up until January, he worked for Post Air Gas. Jarvis was a Post Air Gas supervisor. Holbrooks and Yancey worked for Ferguson. Miller was fired from Post Air Gas in January and was driving a Ferguson truck at the time of the incident. According to a buddy of Holbrooks, Miller was upset because he believed another driver, Holbrooks, was getting longer and better routes than he was. According to reports, Miller had a history of altercation with co-workers and had once been dismissed for fighting at work. The Birmingham News reports that Miller frequently engaged in yelling matches with one of the 3 individuals he killed on August 5th based on interviews with his former co-workers and bosses. Miller was also a dedicated worker who kept to himself, according to his former co-workers as well. He was supposed to be put to death by lethal injection on September 22, 2022, but the execution was postponed because prison personnel could not set up an intravenous access to administer the lethal dose. This was considered a botched execution. It was determined that they would not be able to finish the execution before the deadline of midnight. After the attempt failed, Miller filed a federal lawsuit for how much he suffered mentally and physically during the attempt. The state of Alabama decided in November 2022 to use nitrogen gas instead of a lethal injection to put Miller to death. On September 26, Miller was put to death via nitrogen hypoxia at the Holman Correctional Facility in Atmore, Alabama. At 6:12 p.m., the viewing room's curtains opened and the prison warden read aloud his death sentence. In response to a question about his final words, Miller stated, "I didn't do anything to be in here." He made an inaudible request to his relatives and friends who were watching the execution to take care of someone, but it is not clear who that someone is. He repeated, "I didn't do anything to be on death row," and then said, "Thank you." After Miller said his last words, a corrections officer inside the execution chamber made sure the gas mask worn over his face was sealed tightly and closed the mask valve, which had been opened to allow Miller to speak. At 6:16 p.m., the gas seemed to begin pouring into the mask. His spiritual counselor approached him, touched his leg while praying, as Miller moved his fingers a little on the gurney. At 6:18 p.m., Miller then inhaled deeply and repeatedly raised his head off the gurney. He shook and trembled for approximately 2 minutes as he battled against the restraints on the gurney. Miller then gasped periodically for about 6 minutes. The curtains closed at 6:32 p.m., and he was officially declared dead at 6:38 p.m. Though shorter and less severe, the shaking resembled that of Kenneth Smith's death, the first nitrogen gas execution ever carried out. For his final meal, he got French fries, a baked potato, and a hamburger steak. With Kenneth Eugene Smith's execution in January 2024, this was the second time Alabama had used nitrogen hypoxia to execute a convicted prisoner. Miller's execution was the 1600th death penalty carried out in the U.S. since the practice resumed in 1976. In the same day Miller was put to death, Oklahoma had an execution scheduled as well. Emmanuel Antonio Littlejohn, Oklahoma, September 26. Convenience store owner Kenneth Mears, 31, was shot and killed on June 19, 1992 in Oklahoma City during a robbery carried out by 2 attackers. Glenn Bethany and Emmanuel Littlejohn, the perpetrators, were taken into custody and accused of killing and robbing Mears. In separate trials between 1993 and 1994, Littlejohn was given a death sentence and Bethany a life term. One contentious aspect of the case involved the absence of concrete proof as to Mears' killer. Throughout his appeals, Littlejohn insisted on his innocence, but the courts dismissed his arguments. Littlejohn, who had a lengthy criminal history, had just been released from jail for assault, robbery, and burglary at the time of the murder, and Bethany was a drug dealer. The two men agreed to carry out an armed robbery in order to collect cash since they were both in debt to a known drug dealer. Littlejohn and Bethany stormed into the business with guns drawn. One of the men shot Mears in the face during the armed holdup. Then the two men left the shop. A number of individuals, including spectators outside the store and two of Mears' co-workers, witnessed the event. Born in Indiana, Mears was raised by his mother and had 3 brothers and 2 sisters who were deeply impacted by his death. Emmanuel Littlejohn spent over 30 years appealing his death sentence. In each appeal, Littlejohn maintained his innocence and said he had never shot Kenneth Mears. On August 7, 2024, Littlejohn appeared before the Oklahoma Pardon and Parole Board for his clemency hearing. He acknowledged his role in the robbery of Mears' convenience store during the hearing, but he said that Bethany was the one who pulled the trigger and that he did not kill Mears. Littlejohn apologized for his involvement in Mears' death, begged for pardon, and conveyed his condolences to Mears' family for their loss. Furthermore, Littlejohn's mother, who was just 15 years old when she gave birth to him, begged for forgiveness for her only child, whose death penalty drove her to give up drugs, a habit she had battled from her teenage years and during her pregnancy. The State Pardon Board recommended clemency for Littlejohn on the same day of the hearing by a majority vote of 3-2. Littlejohn's destiny was in the hands of Oklahoma State Governor Kevin Stitt. Stitt had only once awarded clemency in his time as a governor to convicted murderer Julius Jones. Littlejohn was not pardoned by him. Emmanuel Littlejohn, 52, was executed by lethal injection at Oklahoma State Penitentiary early on September 26. He was allegedly given a deadly injection with 3 drugs: potassium chloride, decuronium bromide, and midazolam. At 10:17 a.m., he was declared dead. Littlejohn is said to have turned to face his mother and daughter and stated, "Everything is going to be okay. I love you." Littlejohn's last meal request prior to his execution included a meat pizza, 2 slices of cheesecake, and Coca-Cola. There are 7 more people scheduled to be executed by the end of 2024. If you want to see who were the people already executed in the first half of 2024, watch this video.